In today's gospel reading, we have an account of the death or the martyrdom of John the Baptist. He dies because he proclaims the truth that it is wrong for Herod to take his brother's wife. In other words, he was living in an immoral relationship. Now, we might ask the question, did John the Baptist think that by addressing this issue with King Herod, that King Herod would change his ways? Probably not. Did John the Baptist know that there might be some very severe negative consequences if he were to speak out against King Herod? Probably. But he still spoke out. And we might ask the question, why did he still speak out? And the reason is because John understood that everybody is called to salvation. Everybody is called to prepare themselves for the coming of the Messiah, including someone like King Herod. But not only that, John also knew that the sins of leaders are much more serious and grievous than the sins of the common, ordinary folk. Why is this the case? Because, as I mentioned before, peer pressure can be very great. So if our peers are doing bad things, we're more likely to do it also. But when it comes to leaders, whether it's civil leaders or even leaders in the church, their sins have a greater impact on people. So take, for example, the issue of marijuana use. So even before, young people or people in general would engage in using marijuana. But then it was made legal. And once it was made legal, in other words, once it's approved by civil authority, then it's kind of like it's harder to argue against it. So in other words, the decisions and the actions of leaders, whether political leaders or religious leaders, if they are sinful, it will have a greater impact on society. So John is speaking out against King Herod for this reason. And we see in the Old Testament, in particular the book of the prophet Isaiah, the prophet points out that, as I mentioned, the sins of the leaders are much more offensive towards God than the sins of the common people. So he speaks out. And, when it comes to King Herod, so yes, he was in a sinful relationship, but it's also important to note that sin blinds us. So sin blinds us. And the more we are given over to sin, the more blind we become, the more foolish we become. So in the case of King Herod, well, he had lust for his brother Philip's wife, and he takes her as his own. And then her daughter, Herodias' daughter, dances for King Herod. In other words, he's motivated by lust, and because she probably danced in a way to arouse his lustful desires, he foolishly offers her anything she wants. Now, he probably didn't expect that she would ask for the head of John the Baptist, but she did. And even there, he should have said no. But he foolishly, first of all, offers her anything, and then foolishly goes ahead with even taking the life of a man who is a great or the greatest prophet of God in the Old Testament times. So sin blinds us. And sin, when it comes to leaders, whether there are leaders in the church or political leaders, they too can be blinded by sin. And so we need to consider this. So should we be like John the Baptist to speak out against injustice in society and injustice in government? Well, absolutely. And in fact, we all have that duty and that obligation. And in many ways, when it comes to voting, that's when we really manifest our voice. In other words, our opinion. So would you vote for a politician who is responsible or is okay with killing 100,000 children every year? Would you vote for such a politician? Would you vote for a politician who is okay and supports the sexualization of our children through the sex ed curriculum, even in the Catholic school system? Would you vote for such a politician? Would you vote for politicians that, say, well, marriage isn't really between a man and a woman and anyone can adopt a child, or a politician who's okay with allowing pornography to be widespread in society, even when secular society acknowledges that pornography is bad for individuals. Would you vote for such a politician? And it's something really to consider, because many Catholics do vote for such politicians. And their excuse is, oh, well, it's a family tradition. We always vote for this party or that party. And while they did some good things for us, they're offering us good packages, good incentives, good financial incentives, good benefits from the government, that's why we're going to vote for them. In other words, the gain that we might get is much better than the moral issues that are at stake, and including human lives that are at stake. And this is very serious, because when we vote for politicians who, for example, support abortion, 100,000 every year, we're partially responsible for those deaths. This is very, very serious. So the sins of leaders, as I mentioned, have a greater impact. And yes, the same applies to, religious leaders also. St. Teresa of Avila says that when a priest dies, he will either take with him 1,000 souls to heaven or 1,000 souls to hell. I mean, imagine that. So the influence of a priest can be so great. This is why it's so important for us to pray for priests and for religious leaders, but also, as St. Paul tells us, to pray for those who are in positions of authority in government, in other words, in secular society. So if we do not speak out against injustice, injustice will continue to spread, and it will get worse and worse. So yes, many of our politicians are blinded because of their sinfulness, because of their lack of belief in God. And if we don't speak out, it will just continue to get worse. Now, what did King Herod do? Now, keep in mind, he wasn't a real king. I mean, yes, he was in one sense, but they were under the dominion of the Romans. So he was kind of a puppet king. So yes, he had some authority, but he didn't have full authority. And so he couldn't do anything that he wanted, but he's able to kill John the Baptist. So what did he do, and why did he do it? He silenced John the Baptist, first by putting him in prison, and secondly, by cutting off his head. So it wasn't just Herod, it was Herodias who requested this. So in other words, people in positions of authority can silence you. And in fact, this is what is happening right now. And a lot of people aren't aware of it because they just read the regular news. And, this is why I encourage people to read LifeSite News, or there's so many other good news sources. So the government is enacting legislation to monitor social media, like what people post on YouTube and all these things. And in other words, they're going to be censoring what we say. So we can't say certain things. If it's not politically correct, we can't say it. So, eventually priests won't be able to put their homilies online if they're teaching Catholic truths based on the Bible. This is what's coming. This is what's happening. And people aren't speaking out. And in fact, we see in certain countries where there is great political rule, very powerful political rule, that if anyone speaks against the government, they are taken away, they are arrested, they are thrown in prison. So this is happening in communist countries even now, and as I mentioned before, there are certain politicians here in Canada who favor that sort of system and want that sort of system. They want ultimate control and power over their people, to be able to dictate what everybody says, what everybody does, and how everybody behaves. And this is what we're headed towards, and people don't see that. So we're going to lose our religious freedoms, we're going to lose the right to speak out. And this is why we should speak out all the more now, while we still have the chance, while we still have the opportunity to do so. Time is running out. John the Baptist gave his life for the truth because the truth is so very important. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola. As you know, he's the founder of the Jesuits. And, there's a whole lot that we could say about his life and about the Jesuits in general. But one thing is that it was a movement in the church, or a new religious order in the church, that was very committed to the truths of our faith and very zealous about living those truths and promoting those truths. So usually with any religious order, sometimes they focus on one aspect of our faith, but this is common to every religious order. So a love of the truth and a zeal, an intense zeal to want to live the truth and to promote the truth. And this is something that we should all have in other words, we should have those same sentiments. A love for the truths of our faith, and which includes all moral truths, and a zeal to live out that faith and to promote that faith, which also entails speaking out against injustice in society. Just a reminder, this evening we have our movie night. It's every second Saturday, so it's at 7 p.m., and we are watching the series The Chosen, which is about the life of Christ and his disciples, his followers. So it's fairly short segments, roughly half hour to maybe an hour, and we have a discussion afterwards, as well as some trivia questions based on the previous episode or the episode that we just watched. And it's organized by the Knights of Columbus, and they actually provide a gift or a prize for the person who gets the answers the trivia questions correctly. So just a kind of incentive to encourage more people to join in. So you can find the Zoom link on our parish website, and that's tonight, this evening at 7 p.m.